Good evening, everyone. I'm Karen Peart, Chair of the Fund for Women and Girls. And thank you all for joining us today. On behalf of the Community Foundation, the Advisory Board of the Fund for Women and Girls, donors to the fund, and our nonprofit partners, we're delighted to bring you this dynamic program, and we look forward to doing so again in the fall. We have a pretty packed program this evening featuring a conversation with Dr. C. Nicole Mason and my fellow advisory board member, Keisha Harp. Following their conversation, there will be a question and answer period, and we'll conclude with remarks from the Community Foundation President and CEO, Will Ginsberg. Our program today continues the conversation we started last November, looking into the disproportionate effect of COVID-19 on women, particularly women of color. Since the November program, the Women's Funds and the state collaborated to create a statewide report on how COVID-19 has affected women in Connecticut. You can find the report on our website, and we will include a link to the report in the summary communication you'll receive. Our guest today, Dr. C. Nicole Mason, leads the Institute for Women's Policy Research and will share her perspective on the organization's recent survey research information. My fellow advisory board member, Keisha Harp, will also lead the conversation and talk with Dr. Mason. I now have the honor of introducing this evening's speakers. Dr. C. Nicole Mason is President and CEO of the Institute for Women's Policy Research. She's the author of Born Bright, A Young Girl's Journey from Nothing to Something in America. And prior to leading the Institute for Women's Policy Research, she served as Vice President of Programs at the Washington Area Women's Foundation and was Director of the Center for Research and Policy in Public Interest. Dr. Mason also served as Executive Director of the Women of Color Policy Network at NYU's Robert F. Wagner Graduate School of Public Service. And there she held the distinction of being one of the youngest scholar practitioners to lead a major US research center or think tank. Dr. Mason is an Ascend Fellow at the Aspen Institute in Washington, D.C. She has written hundreds of articles on women, leadership development, and economic security, and has been featured in national television and print media. She also delivered a TED Talk at TED Women 2016 on the courage to disrupt and the gift of being difficult. Dr. Mason is described as one of the nation's foremost intersectional researchers and scholars, spearheading research on issues relating to economic security, poverty, women, entitlement program reforms, policy formation, and political participation among women, communities of color, youth, and racial equity. Dr. Mason was also recently named Forbes magazine 50 World Leaders, and she currently serves on the board of All Our Kin. We'll also hear from Keisha Harp. She's the Senior Director of Sales and Marketing at Women's Business Enterprise Council in Metro New York, where she's actively involved in business development, marketing, and sales opportunities with corporate members and women business enterprises. Keisha is an active community leader in New Haven, and in addition to her advisory board membership on the Fund for Women and Girls, serves on a number of other boards, including the Junior League of Greater New Haven, the Urban League of Southern Connecticut, the Supplier Diversity Development Council, and the Advisory Council of the Center for Women in Business at Quinnipiac University. I can't think of two better speakers to tackle this topic than Dr. Mason and Keisha Harp. I'll now turn it over to Keisha and Dr. Mason. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen, for a wonderful introduction. And we're so excited to have you with us, Dr. Mason.
Yes, I'm so excited to be here and, a part of this conversation.
So before we dive into this, how exciting is it to be listed among these wonderful women and men and leaders, world leaders on the Forbes, on the world's 50 greatest leaders list? Was that just a wonderful surprise? And Full and bright.
It was really, unexpected. And they called and they said, "You've been nominated." And I said, "Okay, well, thank you for the nomination." And then, when I was honored, I was like, "Oh my goodness, this is really great." And really, I believe it was a reflection of all the work we've done over the last year and helping to frame the pandemic and its impact on women and families, and really making sure that those voices were heard at the national level. And so I think it was a reflection of that. And also, I have to say, like 2 decades in the making, because I've been doing this work for a long time.
Exactly.
So.
But it's exciting to see, it was exciting to see your photograph. So you open this link and you're like, oh my God, I know this person and that person. I'm gonna speak to her this afternoon. That's how wonderful and exciting. And especially for us here at the Community Foundation, we really love that you are leading this great organization and really would like to learn more about your decision to lead this organization. We want to learn more about your work at the Institute for Women's Policy Research. It's something that I think all the participants on this call would like to know more about, that organization and your role as a leader there.
So I want to start out by saying that I first came into contact with IWPR 2 decades ago. I was a young community activist, actually. I started doing work, volunteering at a battered women's shelter in Washington, D.C. while at Howard University. And when I graduated, I decided to start a nonprofit organization. Again, I'm like 22, 23, and I was going to change the world and make policy change. Only I didn't realize, this is before social media and even barely the internet. So everything was done by fax and phone. And so I didn't know how hard it would be. And one of the first people I met doing that work and talking about women of color, economic policy and security was Heidi Hartman. And she gave me, who then was the leader of IWPR. And she gave me my first opportunity to speak on the Hill. She invited me to testify with her. And I stayed connected to the organization all that time. I went on to get my PhD, worked in a number of different roles, and been really engaged in the movement, the women's movement, for all this time. So when the opportunity presented itself to throw my hat in the ring, I thought it was a really good opportunity to marry my passions and work. But I just have to say, I don't think that I don't know if they thought it was going to be me, if that makes sense. I think many were expecting the role to go to another, just to be perfectly honest, another white woman. And so when I stepped into the role, it was I think it sent a message to the field about the importance of not only research and policy, but making sure that this work has an intersectional framework. And we've seen in this moment how important that is to understanding the pandemic's impact on a diverse group of women. And so, just really hit the ground running. And I just want to, say that, it still feels, I have to pinch myself sometimes because it does feel like I'm doing the work I was called to do.
That's wonderful. The fund has a history with IWPR, as you might know, that in 2012, we worked with them to produce the status of women and girls in New Haven report. So of course, we have a special affinity for your organization. And I'm so excited, even from a personal point of view, with the organization that I work with, we predominantly advocate for women business owners. So we are in the extended field and in advocacy work, but on a personal note, I've been doing a lot of work trying to find great and legitimate sources for research. And, I'm taken back. I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I have to start thinking about, the kind of research and what it means to find legitimate, objective research and to make sure that it's inclusive. So I've been reviewing RFPs recently and I was like, oh, this isn't going to work. So it was interesting to do all the research on you and your work to say, oh my gosh, I personally as a leader in a nonprofit organization working in the women's advocacy space have to be very purposeful and careful and just slow down the process to say, well, I can't just send this information out and then hit the ground running with data or information that's not legitimate, you know? And I think I take an additional sense of responsibility because of my background and who I am. I have to take that all into consideration. So your work is very timely, and as you said, 2 decades in the making, because you've been doing this work for a very long time. Now, jumping in a little bit into the What Women Want report, I found it, and we, on here we've been talking a lot about it, and it's been interlaced in a lot of our conversations and recent meetings here. So we wanted to find out from you, on a personal level, was there anything in the report that surprised you?
Actually, there was very little in the report that surprised me because, when you are, first of all, I'm a mom, I'm a single mom with 11-year-old twins. And so the pandemic and everything that we were talking about, I felt really personally. And I was also hearing from, women and my friends and relatives who were also struggling, from, other women leaders at, CEOs to women on the front line who are working at grocery stores. Again, people I know well, saying they were struggling. So when we did the report and we saw the findings, I think for me, it was articulating that this is not a one-off. This is not a, blip. This is actually what's happening. It's rooted in the lives of women, but to also put it in context that many women were struggling before the pandemic. And so many of these issues, feel more urgent and people feel more squeezed. But, for some women, they had been really struggling with these issues from the very beginning. So issues related to childcare, work-life balance, no flexibility, economic vulnerability, lower wages, no health care. These were all issues that women were struggling with. I think if there was one, I don't think there's one thing that I said, oh my God, I don't believe this. The only thing that I would say that stood out to me was the vulnerability. Again, when we talk about the intersections of race, class, gender, other markers of difference, the intersections of ethnicity and immigration status and citizenship status was really front and center, because for Latino women, for example, whatever issues, Black women and white women or other groups of women were facing, they were heightened and exacerbated, especially during the pandemic, because of the vulnerability of immigrants over the last 4 years, particularly with this administration, and then going into COVID. So that was one of the things that stood out to me, if I had to think of something, but, I don't think we were.
So anything that encouraged you, particularly annoyed you, perhaps?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think what annoys me. So what annoys me is that that women are very clear about the ways in which we need support and help. And have, articulated and said, I'm struggling with childcare. I'm struggling with not being able to make ends meet. I'm struggling with juggling caretaking responsibilities in my job, not being flexible and accommodating. And yet, and still, we, at the federal level, it's like, oh, well, I don't know what's going on, or no, we're not going to enact paid sick leave, or we're not going to raise the minimum wage, or, so that disconnect between what women are saying they want and need, and what's happening at the state and federal levels is a bit, upsetting to me and disappointing, actually.
And, I consider myself to be in a pretty privileged situation. And I work for a women's nonprofit. Our organization's been around for a while, but, I still found myself was it now? My son is going to be 3 in August. And I still remember finding out, like, how am I going to tell my boss I'm pregnant? What is this maternity leave policy going to look like? Do I have to negotiate? I haven't been practicing law, but now I have to do research and make a presentation and talk to all my friends and crowdsource to find about information about what that means. Will I have a job afterwards? But I discovered that it didn't matter. I could have been my friends that work at Morgan Stanley or my friends that are working retail. I found everyone had the same concern. And then I was so shocked. And I was like, why am I shocked? I know better. I read the newspaper daily. I'm a pretty literate person. But then what really drove it home to see how unfortunate a position we are in as American women. I'm here in New Haven. I was attending a mommy and me class in New Haven with a lot of Yale students or Yale affiliated women. And there was a woman in my class who was visiting from Montreal because her husband was on sabbatical at Yale. And so we're all talking about our maternity leave and our insurance and benefit, chit-chatting. And she said, how much are you paying for childcare? And we told her, and she was like, that's a mortgage. That's shocking. And we said, well, how much are you paying? She's like, oh, about $25 a month. And we're like, where are you spending your kid? Is this legitimate? Like, what? And she's like, oh no, it's in Montreal. And she explained the facility to us. And we were all so skeptical that she could actually be, and we're like, who are you? Where are you from? What are your qualifications? Why are you leaving your child at a place that's only $25 a month? Not realizing that, we were the ones that should be outraged that we were in this situation. And for me, looking at that report and seeing, that it still pops up and that it was still so much, so present in your survey, that kind of annoyed me. We looked at the results and the 5 priority areas where it's healthcare, the economy, racial justice or equity, raising the minimum wage and taxes. But then I was wondering when I looked at how, and perhaps this is just to get some feedback from you and just your commentary on why do you think that childcare was listed so low as one of the subcategories? I think it was at number 15, given the situation we're in, or the year we've just went through. I can't say that we're in the second quarter of this year and that we're quote unquote bouncing back, but what are your thoughts on that? Why was it ranked so low?
So that's a really good question. And actually, we had to do a deep dive because, the data, the data is the data, but we have to interpret what the data means. Like, what does this mean that childcare was at the bottom? What that means, it means a couple things. The first thing it means is that women are used to not having adequate childcare. So we, figure it out, so, myself, after I came off of maternity leave, which was really just a combination of my vacation time and sick leave, I couldn't find affordable childcare in New York City for 2 newborn children, babies. So my paternal grandmother came from California to take care of the kids, to take care of them. She was unpaid, and that's how I was able to go back to work. So we figure it out. And I think when we look at the list of priorities for women, it is really about getting a job. It's about meeting their basic needs. I need healthcare, I need a job, we need to get this economy under control. And if you have childcare, that's okay, but I don't have a job. I'm not economically secure. I don't have money to take care of my family. So I think we're seeing what the priorities we're seeing we see is a direct reflection of what women are prioritizing and ranking, so okay, well, I'll ask my neighbor to keep my kid until I figure out care. But I want to say that is not indicative of the priority, but I do think the story you just told is sort of what happens to us when we think it's normal to navigate a broken childcare system and pay, a mortgage or 30% of your income for care. And we're suspicious of anybody who does not, and in
Yeah,
fact,
we were grilling her. We're like, who are
well,
you?
what's
Where
going
you
on?
live?
This must be unsafe. They must be outside. They must, be like, something's going on there. But the truth of the matter is that the US spends less than 1% of its gross domestic product on child and family policy. So that's less than, the only country above, we're only above Turkey and Ireland.
Oh, wow.
So the floor is really low. So we're actually spending close to nothing on childcare and family care policy. So even now that we're talking about universal childcare, no family spending more than 7% of their income on care. I mean, it sounds like crazy talk, but it's really not. Actually, Sweden does it, Norway does it, Canada does it. There's a number of countries where childcare is a labor right. So if you have more than 100 employees or 200 employees, you have to provide childcare for your workers. Now, we can get into whether it's quality care, but that is a mandate. So imagine if we had that, childcare is a labor right. So in order for women to be able to work, which we know that that's the case, you have to have adequate care, but to say, okay, well then it's up to employers to provide that kind of, support. It's crazy talk.
It is very shocking. Part of the mission of the organization I work with is that, we are advocating for women to, can get the best possible support when they own their own business. Fine, they can set their own salary, pay themselves what they think they're worth, right? But I have said over the past few years that I've been here, over 6 or 7 years, speaking to different business owners who are also parents, time and time again, they said, I'm like, why did you leave the major corporation that, you dreamed of working at when you were in business school? Or, they're like, I had a child, and working in finance was no longer a fit. Or I, was so disheartened by the childcare and having the lack of having a flexible schedule. So much so that I cannot believe that that's actually the impetus for so many women starting their business. Okay, well then fine. But then I wonder, there's also all this brain drain, and, isn't there some sort of impetus from employers to, harness that huge loss of brain power? And, and that should be an impetus. Like, what is going to be the burning fire to say, okay, employers, you can't keep on losing so many great women from the workforce. How are they going to solve that issue?
Well, you know what? I have a lot of feelings around this, but one of the biggest, things I think about is the fact that, we always frame when women leave the workforce to, take care of their families, or for other caretaking responsibilities, including caring for, elderly family members. Women are, even if they're married, it's expected that they will leave to do caretaking responsibilities. And we frame it as a choice, like she chose to leave, but we have to ask ourselves, is it really a choice if the workforce, the workplace is not set up for an alternative choice?
Right.
So, if you, our workplace model is very male and masculine, and it assumes that you can work from 9 to 10, 9 in the morning, sometimes before, to 10 at night, travel overnight on business trips. And you are penalized if you cannot act unencumbered, like you do not have children. And so even though women are half of the workforce, our workplace and workforce, the workplace hasn't adapted to that fact. And so now when, we have a pandemic, women are expected to still work, and then also still homeschool, and still be, doing all their caretaking responsibilities. And employers are like, we've heard horror stories where some employees are like, I don't care, figure it out.
Yeah.
And women, and so when I think about even women who become entrepreneurs or, scale down to part-time, again, it's framed as a choice. But, is it really a choice? Did you really have a choice? And even I did that after my children. I said, I I can't work as much as I did before I had them. And
Mhm.
so I consulted for a few years until I got older. But did I think my career suffered because of it? Yes, I do. And again, when you talk about brain drain or that loss of potential of women's brains or talents, that's really something to consider. And just one more stat that I want to share is that, like, if women had the labor force participation of women in Norway, right? So we stayed if we had the labor force participation of those women who have a subsidized childcare system, we would contribute $16 trillion to the GDP. So it's good for the economy. It's not just, the nice thing to do. It actually benefits the economy, and companies get the benefit of women, brilliant women.
Right. I met a business owner who said that she discovered that she started a consulting company, and she said, "Oh, I used to chase women whenever I saw them had a little bump. And I would say, hi, this is my card. I know you're going on maternity leave, but if you don't want to return to this corporation, I know who you are. I know of your reputation. Would you work for us as a consultant on, project by project basis?" And I thought that was brilliant, that a whole economy and someone, was savvy enough to say, and it was exciting that it was a great business idea, but it saddened me that she just said, well, I built a multi-million-dollar business on just harnessing all these women I knew were going on maternity leave, and I knew they weren't going to return to their companies. So I just had them working on a case-by-case basis on different projects. And I said, I cannot believe it. She's like, yeah, I will show you proof that it was successful. And I thought, well, this has to be some information that should light a fire. And then, of course, now this wonderful 2020 happened, that for as much sadness and heartache as we all experience, I wonder, how much this conversation is going to continue. And I hope it does continue, because there's so many, just as you said, economically vulnerable people that are out there, especially women, and all the women who felt undervalued. Sadly, now they've been pushed into the forefront with reports, with this report, I think. And I hope that maybe it might spur a different way to get women reintroduced to the workforce. I've been reading a lot about women maybe moving out of the typical sectors, as I think you've said, and highlighted that there were sectors that were most impacted by the pandemic: the hospitality, leisure, et cetera, travel industries, that, retail, that there's so many women represented for various reasons. If it will encourage women to be able to get retrained to participate in different ways, because I know that I had family and friends who were like, well, Keisha, you're so lucky, you can work from home and all you need is a Wi-Fi connection. I don't have the skill set to do that type of work, So let's see, I wonder if we have some questions for you coming up. I'll check. Okay. Well, and I just wanted to also, before we even move on to questions, I love the idea that I saw you quoted with your C-section, and I wanted you to talk a bit about that, to see how you think, how that ties into this conversation today, and even with the report.
Well, so when we were thinking, when I was only 5 months into the role, by the way, at IWPR. So like you just, and it was like a rough 5 months. So I kept saying, what else can go wrong? I mean, like literally everything that, that could happen. And then I would say, oh no, you didn't predict a global pandemic. Like that's pretty much, it. And so, but I felt like it was an important moment for us as an organization to really see and dig a bit deeper in what was happening to women. And so when the numbers started to come out and we saw the enormous job and income losses by women in the sectors, we really wanted to try to frame that what was happening. Mm-hmm. And say that let's call it a she session because it is disproportionately impacting women. It's not, we could have talked about it as an economic downturn impacting women, but I think the she session was something very pithy and allowed people to understand that it wasn't like 2008. It wasn't like the Great Depression, that this was a mixture of, enormous job losses, but also, care crisis that had been gone unattended, and all those things, a health crisis, all those things were coming together. And so it also helped to point us to strategies. So we're not going to do the same thing we did in 2008 because it's different. And we didn't pay attention to the issue of care early on in the pandemic. So the focus, as you know, was on small businesses and like, we need to keep the small businesses afloat. They're the lifeline. And it's like, actually, moms are the lifeline. Women are the lifeline. And when schools and daycares closed, women exited the workforce. And so in order for us to, people keep saying, the April jobs numbers were bad, the May job numbers were bad. And I'm like, yeah, schools are still closed. Daycares are still closed. And we're not going to see any real movement until September. But you have to make investments in this care infrastructure because that is what's going to make the difference for women. And also, there's a lot of women, to your point, who are thinking about entering new sectors altogether. And some people have encouraged non-traditional sectors, construction. What do you want? And it's like, why don't you just make the jobs that women are in good jobs?
Exactly.
Raise the wages, healthcare, flexibility. Like, why do I have to go work on a construction site to make a decent wage? And by the way, I'm still not going to make the same amount as a man doing the same job, even on a construction site. And have to put up with harassment. So why not, if women are nurses, why not raise the wages there? Or the teachers, early care teachers, raise it. So I'm hoping, that we get to a moment, and I have to say, I think we are getting there, where we are really talking about and having the real conversation and the real, strategy conversation about what what'll change the game for women.
Right. And I love that you had in this report that you gave specific directions about here are actionable steps that you can take, right? Because I think this conversation is happening in so many households that even in my immediate network, everyone's talking about, well, my partner is here, my husband or my partner is at home and they're quote unquote helping. And I say, well, even if your partner asks, well, what do you want me to do? That you're still, that's the woman, the ultimate project manager, so.
Get up and just start, you see the dishes in there too.
So, that conversation, I think even in a formal report such as yours, it's a conversation that's just, it keeps on continuing. And as you said, the children not all the schools are open and not everybody is back. And even so, for a lot of women, or, if there are two working parents, then what happens when the school day ends at 3:30 or the 2:30? Like, who's picking up the child?
About summer. Summer is the worst time for a parent, by the way. Everybody knows this, where you're like, well, what am I doing with the kids from 9 to 5 when I have to go to work? What about the camps? And the summer camps are very expensive. And then, kids lose, learning over the summer, especially lower income kids. And so again, if we had a care infrastructure, a solid, robust care infrastructure, we would have aftercare, we would have summer care, we would have care during non-traditional hours where women are working shift work. We would really make it so that women could participate in the workforce. And for those who could not, for whatever reason, they also had economic supports to be able to take care of their families. Because obviously we have a very, the social safety net is almost non-existent these days.
And thank you so much. Now, I think we have a couple questions that are popping up in the Q&A. And for anyone who's participating and listening in, please submit your questions in the Q&A. You should have Q&A and also chat, but we'd like you to submit your questions in the Q&A. We have a specific question for you, Dr. Mason, to talk about your book.
Oh, the book.
The book.
So again, it was during the period where I was consulting or not working full time. I was visiting professor at Spelman College in Atlanta. And
Mhm.
so the book is a memoir. I was raised by a single mom in Los Angeles, California, and it talks about that time, our relationship, all the way over a period of time. Most importantly, it really the sort of cruxes of the book is about how do we talk about structural and institutional impediments to success and opportunity rather than individual failings. And instead of blaming people for the circumstances and the constrained choices that they're forced to make. But it's a story, it reads like a novel. And it's very personal. I mean, I literally, because I was talking about, my childhood experiences, you know, cried the whole time writing it, but I felt it was really powerful to have an alternative narrative about people like me, my family, and a real understanding of why some people don't make it to the other side of the tracks. And it's not about, what they didn't do right.
And that's actually refreshing because, um, you know, people make very lots of assumptions about you, and you say, "Oh, well, who are you? Where are you from?" And you might tell a quick story, and they take the point of view just to fill in those gaps and make the assumptions about who you are. So I think it's very powerful that you told the story, your own way, so that perhaps the reader can take that a step back and say, oh, well, I never thought about someone's experience like that, um, and I think it's important, especially for young women, to read stories and to be exposed to you and the work that you do, because I know that I'm very spoiled. I grew up around a lot of very strong women, and it was important in my family that I get exposed, but I definitely know that I'm very privileged, and I think about it more now that I'm a parent. I'm like, oh, I want to make sure that I'm raising a son who is aware about. So in my space, they call them he for she's. I hate the terminology, but it makes more sense because I want it to be a more active word to make sure that there are men that are advocates for women's issues, because I don't think it's women's issue. I really think it's societal, and it's something that makes us all more active participants. I don't think that your partner or should be like the passive one that says, "Oh, tell me what to do and how can I help?" So that's important to do the work. More questions are popping up. Okay. Can you comment about how this administration is dealing with the priorities in your report?
So I'm really fortunate. I feel very fortunate, and I'm happy to say that the administration has been very thoughtful and engaged with us and many women's organizations across the country. There's a Gender Policy Council. When we did the analysis, IWPR did analysis of family cost savings in the American Families Plan. Like, if we did this, it would save $94 billion. And we got a call from the White House and met with, 3 of their offices to explain how we got our numbers. And that was pretty fun. And so I say that the administration is taking these issues seriously, as you can tell in the American Families Plan, the American Jobs Plan. Obviously, I want them to do more, so I want universal childcare. I want them to raise the living wage. And but I do think we're headed in the right direction. I think what's really frustrating to me now is that there is the public will, right? The public is behind Republicans, Democrats, Republican women, Democratic women. Our survey was nonpartisan. These issues are issues that everybody's behind. Everybody thinks you should have affordable health care. Everybody thinks childcare should be affordable. Then you get to Congress, and there's really a bunch of old white men who were blocking everything. It's just that, and there's no other way to say it. And so that is really a bit disheartening because, because the public is there. So it's not even that, and it's Republicans who are also supportive. Like Republicans overwhelmingly supported the first COVID bill, the second COVID bill, and said that they need the relief. And then across states, you see them cutting unemployment insurance benefits. That directly benefit their constituents. I'm not being political here. I'm just saying that, there's a disconnect between what people are saying they want and what's happening at the federal level. And it's really costing people's lives and, wrecking their livelihood and economic security.
And I'm just going to start asking you these questions because I see there's a lot popping up and I'm not able to make a beautiful transition. The next question that we have is, let's see, what are your thoughts about the level of respect that women receive in the workplace and as entrepreneurs?
Let me just tell you something. I just think we get no respect. I mean, I have to say, there's no group of people I know that work harder than women, and face a lot of obstacles. And, I was on a thing with Megan Rapinoe, the soccer superstar, and she said, you can't outperform inequality. You can't outperform sexism. And so, and I think that's right. We work really, really hard. And even when we get passed over, we work harder, we internalize it. And so people always, I've been asked on some occasion to sort of make the case for pay equity. I was like, I'm not doing that. Like everybody knows that, we're doing the work. So why should we still be convincing people we're valuable or worthy to be paid the same amount as men? And and so really flipping the question around and saying, well, why aren't people respecting women like that? And that's not a question for women. That's a question for the people who treat us bad in workplaces.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's see. We have more popping up for you. This is great information and data for many of us. Some surprises for others. For others of us, no surprises. Given this state of our nation, what concrete steps do you recommend each individual take to try and lift our system to where it should be?
Well, I was on this panel yesterday, and it was sort of very sobering because, for some, on racial equity issues, on gender issues, it feels like we've been having the same fight for like a long time, over and over again. The only thing I think that's a bit different in this moment is the awareness. So you have corporate moms talking, you have moms on the front line. The pandemic has shaken us all in these very, new ways. And so it's hard to unring the bell. So, to keep applying the pressure, and don't forget, because things will open up and feel like they've gotten back to normal, but understanding that this is not the last pandemic, this is not the last economic downturn. And so we need to do the work now, which consists of, again, if people are not, and this is not partisan, but if people are not representing your interest, they don't need to be representing you. So political and social, political and civic engagement is critically important. The second thing is that not all action is federal. So action at the local and state levels are really critically important. And a phone call, at the state local level is really important. And then if you're talking about real concrete human connection kind of change, you don't even have to go far. You can go to the next neighborhood. That in Connecticut or where you are, like you don't even have to go, you don't have to, imagine some other place where you can give your time and resources. It's just really around the corner. Absolutely. Or even our own, families and, and to some extent. So, and, engage with organizations like IWPR, just to see what's going on. I mean, you can just peek in and say, oh, okay, well, this is a new report, or, oh, this, or National Women's Law Center, or time's up. I mean, there's so many good organizations doing, exciting and amazing work, but, and do what you do best. So if you want to get out in the street and, go protest, and that's fine. But if that's not your thing, don't do that. Do something that is your thing. So
yeah, you have to find that right fit for advocacy, and not everyone, this is not everyone's life work necessarily, but you are, it directly affects you. Especially, I think there's so many women on this call that, to your point, I keep on going back to that moment where we're sitting in a circle with our babies and we're like, $25. And then we're like, she's suspicious, let's investigate her, instead of saying, we need to start here and investigate our own system. Like, why don't we have that privilege? What can we do? Why are we like making do? And restructuring our lives and doing special gymnastics to make this workday functional for us. And I always wonder, I'm like, gosh, what are all the women doing that don't have as many resources as I do? And what can I do to help, right? And finding ways to do so. Let's see. What can philanthropy do to support what's important to women?
Well, obviously there's a really huge role for philanthropy to play. Philanthropy has a role to play in speaking out and even supporting, documents, again, in a nonpartisan way, that not lobbying kind of way, about like, proposals, a survey, lifting it up in the community, supporting organizations at the community and grassroots level who are doing this work and trying to make change in their community around an important set of issues. I'm really excited about Mackenzie Bezos's, not Bezos, Scott, gifts and her commitment to, again, making change in her own way, in her own lane, and, even supporting the Women's Funding Network. And so I do think that philanthropy has a really critical role to play, especially for fledgling women's organizations at the state and local level, who in this moment are really, some of them are really struggling to stay afloat. And the last thing I'll say, because I, am in conversation with women philanthropists all the time, but just listen to people. Right. So even during the pandemic, there was a lot of conversation and philanthropy about what should we do? What should we give? Should we give to a program? Do we give? What women, especially Latina women, needed? I was in Texas talking. I said they actually need just direct cash,
right?
Because they were barred from getting COVID relief because of their status. So like when you talk about, like, people will tell you what they need, you just have to listen. So.
Right. And, even just, my pitch for New Haven has so many nonprofits and so many advocacy groups. I think part of that is because we are a college town and we have so many local advocates. There are so many opportunities for us all to get involved, even, start with your church or a soup kitchen or something. People have been extremely creative with reaching out. Let's see, regarding the American Recovery Plan funding, are there states doing great things with the federal funding for women?
Well, implementation, the devil's in the details. So money has gone to states, but we haven't seen the results because of the implementation. So, and different states are going to be better at implementing, and different states are going to take, like the childcare money we were talking about, like Mississippi, for example. There's millions of dollars going into childcare for Mississippi. Mississippi, we all know, is not gonna, may do something different than California does. So we haven't started to see the impacts of the spending and the dollars. But I know that as advocates, one of the things we are focusing on now is the implementation. Like it's good for us to win the money, the bucket of money, but it does no good if it doesn't reach the people on the ground. And so we're still, again, figuring out those dollars and how, how it's going for people on the ground. But we can see the child tax credit, that's going to be amazing when it's implemented, and that that sort of campaign by advocates to make sure people had filed their taxes, even if they made $0, so that they could access the tax credit, and then also working to make that permanent. So I think that's one of the good things that came out of the American Families Plan. The extended unemployment insurance, that's a lifeline. The housing and eviction moratoriums and the rental assistance, we see the impacts of that on the ground. What I'm worried about is sort of, even though we're not out of the clear, especially for women of color and most vulnerable communities, taking all those supports away very quickly, which we see a lot of states. But a state just got sued for taking away the unemployment insurance benefits. So people are not going to stand for it. So
we have about 5 more minutes for our conversation. So I'm going to reach out a bit to see if there are any more questions for you. Please submit them in our Q&A bucket. But I wanted to ask you, Dr. Mason, really just to take this time to share some closing remarks or some thoughts, anything that any call to actions for us, or we've asked you so many different ways. How can we help? How can we be involved? And you've answered them in so many different ways. So really appreciate all your work and taking the time to be with us and having this conversation. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So honored that you could be with us. And, I wish you continued success. I'm very excited that there is someone like you advocating for me and for the women in my family and just our families in general, because and knowing that there's someone out there that has the ear and people are listening to you. So that's very exciting. I hope that we continue to see you on different media platforms and you continue to get more accolades, because as you said, you have been doing this work for quite some time. And I hope this conversation stays in the forefront for all of us to continue to participate and really be a part of the solution. As I know that might sound super corny, but we really do need more people to bring their perspectives to the table. So I'm going to turn it over to you to make some closing remarks before I introduce the president of the Community Foundation.
So the last thing I'll leave you with is that I do feel like this is a once in a generation opportunity for us to get it right, to create a more equitable economy, an economy that works for everyone, and for us not to leave anyone behind in this recovery. We have an opportunity to create a robust childcare infrastructure. Listen, my kids are 11. We're aging out of care in a couple of years. So really, this is not for me. This is for the women right now who are, have small children who are struggling and thinking about how they're going to get care. And also for, my children who will also be grappling with the issue of care in the next generation. So I do think there is an opening that we won't see for a long time. The pandemic has really accelerated many of the conversations that we've been trying to have in a serious way for some time now. And so I just think that it's important for us to not let up, not turn away, not get distracted by some of the things that attempt to distract us in this work. And the last thing I'll say is I think that we all have a role to play, big, small, in little and big ways in our families, in our communities. And collectively, we can really do and make all the change we've been talking about for so long. It's not about, for me, it's no longer about articulating the problem. We know the problem. Some of them have existed for hundreds of years. Poverty has existed for a very long time, the issues of care for a very long time. It's really about innovating and thinking about how do we get it done at all levels, community, federal level, state level. So I'm excited, despite, sometimes I need a rest, but I'm really excited for all the stuff that's happening. And, I'm doing my part as the advocate, and I'm in the, you're doing your part, and all of our parts together. I think it's gonna happen.
It's very exciting. Thank you so much. We hope to see you again, maybe one day in real life in person, so we can continue this conversation and continue to learn more about how we can support the work that you do, and wish you continued success, and hope you can join us again soon.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. And the next speaker will be the president of the foundation, the man who needs no introduction, as I'm told, Mr. Wilkinsburg. I'll put myself on mute.
What I said, Keisha, was I'm the man who wants no introduction, if I think. Good evening, all. And I want to add my welcome and my thanks to all those attending this evening. Your presence here means a great deal to us. I want to say a special thank you to Dr. C. Nicole Mason. That was really fabulous. To Dr. Mason and to Keisha, thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Mason, for being with us tonight. We only wish you were here with us in New Haven so we could share what our community has, this wonderful community has to offer with you. But thank you for your extraordinary leadership at this moment in our history, when leadership on women's issues like wage equity, issues like investments in the care economy, issues like the other kinds of investments that are proposed in the American Families Plan, the things that you were talking about. Leadership on these issues is so vitally important. And thank you for pointing out that we have a once in a generation opportunity on these issues, because I think that's such an important part of the message. And thank you also for all you've added to our understanding, not only tonight and through the reports that your organization produces, but in so many ways to adding to our understanding of the needs and challenges and priorities of women in our country in this time of COVID. And to Keisha, Blake, Harp, thank you as well, Keisha, for all you do for our community, including for the Community Fund for Women and Girls, and for all that you contributed to this fascinating and important dialogue that we all just had the privilege of hearing. I do just want to make a couple of comments on things that were said before I get to my remarks. Dr. Mason, you emphasized in the question about what philanthropy can do, focusing on grassroots organizations, among other things. I want to say this is exactly what the Community Foundation found as we responded to COVID over the last year. All these new organizations and small organizations that emerged to help newly vulnerable people. This was a very important part of our COVID response and will be a very important part of, even more important part of what we do going forward. And Keisha, your comment, which I want to flag, about that we need as a society and as our community, more men who advocate for women's issues, actually who see these issues not as women's issues, but as family issues and as societal issues. And I want to underscore how much I agree with that, and how one of my personal goals is that when we have wonderful programs like this and fantastic guests like Dr. Mason, that we'll actually we have a wonderful crowd tonight, but it is almost entirely women. And I think we need to set ourselves to get more men in our community to hear these messages as well. So this evening, as has been the case at so many memorable events over so many years, the Community Foundation is proud to partner with the Community Fund for Women and Girls. For more than a quarter century, the Community Fund for Women and Girls has been our partner in the most important ways. It is so much more than one of 1,000 funds at the foundation. Its leaders and its volunteers have been so much more for us than a few among the hundreds of volunteers we work with each year. The Fund for Women and Girls has been the eyes through which the Community Foundation has come to see the world differently, to see the world through a gender lens. And the Fund for Women and Girls has been the voice through which a remarkable parade of extraordinary women leaders in our country have, for a quarter of a century, brought their wisdom and their insight and their experience to our community. What you've just heard from Dr. Mason and from Keisha, Blake, Harp adds another very important chapter to that proud history. So to Karen Peart, Chair of the Fund's Advisory Board, and to Christine Kim, Vice Chair, and to Roxanne Cody, who is the liaison to the Fund from our Board of Directors, and to all your colleagues on the Advisory Board, and to the Fund's donors and nonprofit partners, I say a truly heartfelt thank you. And I say too that the fund's current leaders and current volunteers and supporters are carrying forward a proud tradition of women's philanthropic leadership in our community. So my gratitude and admiration extends as well to your predecessors, going back all the way to the fund's very beginnings in 1995. And I'm very pleased when I looked at the attendance list that some of those predecessors are here with us this evening. I also want to acknowledge the commitment, indeed the passion of the members of our staff for the work of the fund, who have worked on the fund over these many years. Sharon Capetta, Dottie Weston Murphy, Kara Strawn, Sarah Fabish, Christina Ciociola, Angela Powers. They all deserve our huge thanks, and they're the current staff members who work on these issues. Some of them have been doing the work of the fund since its founding, literally more than a quarter century ago. All of them bring to this work a passion for gender equity and a deep commitment to women's philanthropy. So over the last 26 years, we have learned so much from the Fund for Women and Girls. And we've seen the fund's impact in other ways too, as it has shaped and connected a whole generation of women philanthropists in our community, women who in turn shape the priorities of our community in so many ways. The Community Fund for Women and Girls has made a huge difference, and how badly we need it and its message and its voice and its leadership today. In mid-2021, as we look forward, as we assess the damage done to so many by this terrible pandemic, as we grapple with all the uncertainty around us, the unfinished work of gender equity is staring us in the face and is demanding ever greater attention. COVID has revealed so much. It has shown us in the starkest and most indisputable terms that far too many women are still too economically vulnerable in our society and in our community today. All of us who are committed to gender equity seek to address this reality. As all of us who are committed to gender equity seek to address this reality, we are immediately confronted by COVID's stern lesson that for all the progress that has been made, the steps we have taken and the strategies we have pursued over the last generation have proven to be inadequate when put to the test in the crucible of COVID. We need to do things differently. And yet at the same time, we can see that COVID has opened new doors to the possibility of real change in ways that only a true crisis can. As Dr. Mason said, we have a once in a generation opportunity. So at this moment of crisis and at this moment of change, as we consider new ways to build a more gender equitable society post-COVID, women's leadership is indispensable and the gender lens is indispensable. And Dr. Mason and the Institute for Women's Policy Research are providing that leadership. They are, in the words of the IWPR website, illuminating gender. IWPR's recommendations for bringing about a gender equitable post-COVID recovery, as we were just hearing, speak to both the immediate economic needs of women and families and also speak to longer-term post-recovery strategies for changes to our underlying systems that address the roles of women in the workforce and in society and in their families. That, I would submit to you, is exactly what it means to provide leadership through a gender lens. Having just heard from Dr. Mason on the challenges and policy choices facing our country, I'm not going to try to add to what she said. I do, however, want to talk for a moment about the Connecticut experience this past year on these issues. Not because it's so different than the national experience, but precisely because it's not. Earlier this year, our Community Fund for Women and Girls joined with partners from around the state to produce the report entitled Essential Equity: Women, COVID, and Rebuilding Connecticut. The Essential Equity Report tells the same alarming story of COVID's deeply disparate impact on women and on women of color. It tells a story of gender and racial ethnic inequity in our state and in our time that should be a thing of the distant past. I will cite just a couple of data points. 76% of Connecticut parents who were out of work last fall due to childcare responsibilities caused by the pandemic were women. In Connecticut, as nationally, the industries hardest hit by COVID have a disproportionately female workforce, including healthcare, where 78% of the workforce is female, education, 67%, and the accommodation and food service industries, 56%. COVID has disproportionately affected Connecticut women in other ways too. At the peak of COVID last fall, the number of calls to Connecticut's Domestic Violence Resource Hub was 30% higher than pre-COVID. And last year, as COVID dramatically increased hunger and food insecurity in our state and in our community, 70% of the calls made to 211 seeking assistance in putting food on the table were placed by women. All of this means, of course, that the women who are suffering because of the gender disparate impact of COVID are right here in our community. They're all around us. They are our neighbors, our family members, our friends, as we were just hearing from Keisha and Dr. Mason. These women are, in the words of the Essential Equity Report, the drivers of our shared economy. Their children are the future of our community. So let us be very clear about what we're facing. The challenge of a gender equitable recovery is our challenge. The challenge of creating gender equity that is so deeply rooted and systemic that it can withstand the next crisis, that's our challenge too. The challenges we have been working on for decades, as Dr. Mason noted, have been clarified, deepened, and reshaped by COVID. And let us also be clear that the challenges of gender inequity and racial and ethnic inequity are deeply and inextricably interwoven. They are both rooted in the history and the structures of our patriarchal society, a society in which power and resources have always been held so disproportionately by white men. Again, COVID has revealed so much about the intersection of racial and gender inequity today. The Essential Equity Report documents how here in Connecticut, the gender disparities of COVID were even more pronounced, much more pronounced in some ways, for women of color. More women of color experienced a loss of income during the pandemic than white women. More women of color accounted for a highly disproportionate percentage of unemployment claims filed during the pandemic. Hispanic and Black women have reported much higher rates of hunger in their families during COVID in Connecticut than have white women. Over the last year, American society has been reckoning with these inequities of race and gender in new ways, confronting old demons with new resolve, new ideas, new energy, and new commitments. On racial equity in particular, the murder of George Floyd a little over a year ago unleashed a movement that extends from corporate boardrooms to governmental priorities at the highest levels, to grassroots organizing, to voter registration. If the wind is truly shifting now to blow in the direction of greater racial, ethnic, and gender equity, the pushback is also gathering momentum. So our challenge is also to see that gender equity and racial and ethnic equity are not set against one another. The goal of a more equitable society here in our community and beyond means rejecting the zero-sum thinking that would tell us that progress for one group can only come at the expense of others. If we believe that gender and racial ethnic inequity share common roots, and if we want to give particular attention to the challenges faced by women of color, then we must address gender equity and racial ethnic equity together. This notably is the approach being taken by the Biden administration. President Biden's executive order on gender equity, issued in March of 2021, mandates that in advancing gender equity, particular focus be given to women and girls who are also persons of color, members of religious minorities, LGBTQ+ persons, persons with disabilities, or persons otherwise affected by persistent poverty or inequality. This is the spirit in which we too must approach our work on gender equity. For all the reasons I've described, and for many more, the Community Foundation sees this time of COVID as demanding a response like no time before. Our board, 11 extraordinary community leaders, led by our chair, Nick Norcott, urged us and supported us to be bold. Stepping forward is the Foundation's $26 million plan to address the impacts of COVID and to advance racial equity. It will provide the Foundation with about $15 million in incremental discretionary monies to be spent over the next 3 years, an increase of more than 50% from what would otherwise be our annual discretionary spending. Stepping forward will also provide about $11 million for 3 newly established endowment funds. This $26 million is coming from both an unprecedented supplemental extraction from our endowments and from donor support. Never before in the 93-year history of the foundation have we ramped up current spending like this. This is an extraordinary step to address the challenges and opportunities of this extraordinary time. Through Stepping Forward, we will not only be spending more, but we are also changing our core philanthropic practices in numerous ways. Last fall, as we were planning Stepping Forward in response to COVID, the foundation commissioned a survey and a series of focus groups and interviews to help us better understand and respond to the changing landscape related to gender equity and racial and ethnic equity in our community. This work was led for us by Nancy Alexander and Connie Royster, who I hope are with us in the audience this evening. Altogether, more than 60 individuals provided input. Their feedback raises important perspectives, challenges our thinking, and contains valuable recommendations. It underscores the intersectionality of race, ethnicity, and gender in the work of creating a more equitable community. It is and will remain an important touchstone for us as we reconsider and strengthen our work to advance gender and racial ethnic equity over the next several years as central objectives of Stepping Forward. And it is but one part of a larger effort at the foundation to broaden our listening to the community as we move forward. Equity and opportunity are inextricably linked. This is especially true here, as Connecticut has for too long been a place of slow growth and limited opportunity. It is especially true now in light of the devastating economic inequities perpetrated by COVID. In our thinking, greater opportunity without greater equity is a recipe for just more division, and greater equity without greater opportunity is a false promise. That is why the foundation's 5-year strategic plan, adopted in 2019, is entitled Opportunity and Equity. This thinking and this plan are taking us in new directions. Even as we seek new ways to build on our long-term support for the local care economy, for example, we are now prioritizing support for women pursuing careers in growth sectors of our local economy and for women entrepreneurs. Indeed, over the last year, the foundation has refocused our mission investments work on early stage women-owned and minority-owned businesses, both through our direct financial support and through the building of what we call an equitable entrepreneurial ecosystem in our community. As the foundation moves forward in our work to build a more equitable community for women and women of color, and as we do so with the supplemental resources provided by Stepping Forward, we work in partnership with so many. The Community Fund for Women and Girls is an indispensable partner, as I've said. Through the statewide Connecticut Collective for Women and Girls, we are privileged to work with many fellow travelers under the leadership of QUELF, the Connecticut Women's Educational and Legal Fund. Yet, as we all know, there will never be enough raised voices, there will never be enough new perspectives, there will never be enough people at the table doing the work of building a more equitable community. Our community at every level must come together even more strongly if we are to seize the opportunities for change of this unique moment in our history. We invite your engagement in any way you choose. Please join us. We're so grateful for your interest in and commitment to this work. Thank you again to Dr. C. Nicole Mason for your leadership and your presence here with us this evening. You've inspired us. Thank you to the Community Fund for Women and Girls. And thank you all once again for being with us here this evening. That concludes our program. You will be getting an evaluation from us by email, and we'd appreciate if you would fill that out. Thank you all very much again for being with us tonight. Thank you.